With the release of Echoes of Wisdom, it looks like it's going to be an open world experience, and that is a huge departure from the original 1986 classic that was released. And, it's a big change from even the 1998 game whenever it jumped into 3D with Ocarina of Time. And then in 2017, we had Breath of the Wild, which was the first open world experience. And since it's come out, there's been some concerns that people are like, we're no longer going to get any classic Zelda gameplay. And, what does that mean? So, from what I've been able to gather and understand, it seems like what the classic Zelda gameplay is, it's a single player experience, and it requires, there's like a linear plot line, there's really large dungeons, and in those dungeons you'll find key items, and those key items can be either really useful, like you use them multiple times throughout the adventure like the hookshot is, or they're, only really used in the dungeon like the spinner was in Twilight Princess. So, with Echoes of the Wisdom coming out, and with all the trailers that we've seen, the gameplay does look very similar to what we saw in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So does that mean that there's no more classic Zelda games ever going to come out or be made? I have news for you. Nintendo has been changing up the game since before Breath of the Wild. Let me explain. So, with the whole idea of linear gameplay, big dungeons, the dungeons in the original Zelda game were actually kind of small. They were maybe a few rooms big, and that can be put up to hardware and things like that, which is fair. But when you look at that, it's much more similar to Breath of the Wild than people maybe originally would think. Like, the big departure that the Zelda games had was with the second game, Link's Awakening. Like, it was a completely different gameplay style, and I would argue that it was actually more linear than the original Zelda game, because you could find the dungeons in the original Zelda game in any order. Whether or not you could get through them was a completely different matter if you hadn't gotten the special key item from the previous dungeons. But in Link's Adventure, like, I remember the opening scene, you cannot go and find any of the other dungeons until you beat the first one. And it's a far more linear experience than the first game was. And it had a whole side-scrolling element to it, like if you ran into a monster out in the fields, it would change screens completely. There were magic spells introduced into this, which there weren't really any magic spells in the original Zelda game. And there were all kinds of new enemy types in the second game, which, yay, enemy variety, we like that. So, after the second game, we jumped to 2002, where they made a port for A Link to the Past for the Game Boy Advance, but it had a bonus game included in it, Four Swords. Now, this game was, Nintendo's probably first foray into multiplayer when it came to Zelda. If you had 4 friends that also had the game, you could all hook your Game Boy Advances together if you had the appropriate cords, and you could all play through the game together. I didn't really have a lot of people that I played with, so I was never able to get that. But just looking on, the different websites talking about the game, who people who've actually played it, apparently it also would randomly generate dungeons for you, so there was no linearity to that game at all if it was just randomly generating which dungeons you went into in whatever order. And it had a competitive nature to it as well, which at that point, Zelda had only ever been a single player game. There wasn't really a competitive edge to it unless you were doing things like speedruns. And then when Wind Waker came out that same year for the GameCube, it had a co-op option with hooking up your Game Boy Advance to the GameCube. It wasn't very super involved. I remember playing around with it a little bit with my brother or my sister, and it would let the secondary player drop bombs, or you could get health potion refills and a few other things out of it, and a few different buffs and things like that. But it wasn't really it was something where the main player still had a lot of control over when they would use those items. So, yeah, you could say it was like their first play with co-op, but I wouldn't really go into it too deeply with that. The next game where they remade the Four Swords game and called it Four Swords Adventures in 2004, that I would say was probably more akin to an actual co-op mode. They reintroduced 4-player. You had to have multiple Game Boy Advances that you could connect to the GameCube for multiple players to join in. But again, if you had friends who had their own Game Boy Advances and you had the cords for the GameCube, it would be really easy to, just hook it up and everyone play together. So what was nice though about this game and how I was actually able to figure out the Four Sword story is that they did have a single player mode to it, to where, you didn't have to have other people with the game in order to play with you. You literally could just, play it as a single player. And I enjoyed that. I thought that was very nice that they went through and made sure that there was a single player option for those who wanted to know the story. And then a few years later, in 2009, we got Spirit Tracks. And this is technically the first canon game where you could play with Zelda. I'm going to play kind of really as Zelda, but you could play with her. It wasn't co-op, which was a little disappointing, but it was more similar to Luigi, if you've played Luigi's Mansion 3, where, you summon Luigi, you can, switch over to him for, certain segments and move around and have him do things as you need to. So you mostly played as Link, but there were certain places in the game where you, had to take control of Zelda in order for you to progress through the area, because she was the only one that could, get through the area. Link would take damage or something if he stepped into an area. Zelda was in a suit of armor. She was fine. And then after that, we come to A Link Between Worlds in 2013. This game was set very similarly to A Link to the Past, just like Echoes of Wisdom is. It doesn't have the big expansion like Echoes of Wisdom does, but it's, still looks very similar to A Link to the Past. But this game is perhaps Nintendo's first sort of playing around with the ideas that eventually led to, Breath of the Wild, where you could do any of the dungeons in any order you wanted to do them, because you had a dude that would sell you the key items from those dungeons. So then you could just be like, okay, I want to rent or buy this, gauntlet. That'll let me pick up heavy rocks. So I can go up to, the Death Mountain Hebra area first, beat Dungeon technically 3, and then, go about and do it however you want to do it. So there wasn't really any true order to how you would beat the dungeons. So long as you could afford to buy the item, you could do the dungeons in any order you wanted. And it's one of those things where it's there were ways to make money if you were lucky, or you could just spend hours upon hours cutting grass and beating up monsters to get enough rupees to buy all the things you wanted, and then you could just go out and do things however you wanted to do it. There were still dungeons like people were expecting, the big grand dungeons, and there was a linear storyline, things happen in a specific order. But there wasn't really a limit on how you got it done. There were just key points where different cutscenes would be activated and went from there. And then we see Nintendo go back to sort of the multiplayer setup with Triforce Heroes. You also had various outfits in Triforce Heroes that would give you different abilities. Which is, I think, kind of where they were playing around with the idea of, Link having various clothes, and those clothes would give you different buffs or give you different abilities. So depending upon which outfit you had on, again, this wasn't a game that I particularly played because, again, I don't have a lot of people that I play with. Yes, I heard it had a single player mode, but I heard it wasn't great. So this is the only official Zelda game I haven't actually played. But, depending upon if you wanted to make a dungeon easy or hard, you could just pick a specific outfit and be like, okay, I want to do this in easy mode, so I'm going to pick this outfit that makes, the fire temple really easy to get through. Or you could be like, all right, I want to have a bit of a challenge. I'm going to, not take this armor that makes it really easy to kill a specific enemy type. I'll have to work a little bit harder to kill the main enemy, but that's what we got. So, Nintendo's been playing around with different gameplay styles from the very beginning of Zelda. You can't argue that, Nintendo has ever actually had a classic Zelda gameplay style. They've never had that. The only thing that they've really kept was interesting dungeons that had key items and a storyline that was linear, like it progressed in a certain order. Breath of the Wild was the real first departure from those elements. Like the Divine Beasts, they were all very kind of similar. They didn't really have any themes, they didn't have any key items. There were some story elements, but they weren't really super heavy, other than like at the very beginning of the game, and then at the end of the game. And then if you went through and got all the memories, there was a little bit of story that you could piece together there and it'd make the ending either more or less robust. And you know what? Nintendo heard those complaints about Breath of the Wild, and when they went back and made Tears of the Kingdom, they brought the interesting dungeons back. Yeah, sure, they didn't have key items anymore, but those dungeons were very, very interesting. And depending upon, if you had the right gear or the right equipment, it would make it easier or harder to get through the dungeons. Like, a lot of people cheese the fire temple in Tears of the Kingdom if they, slapped together 2 fans and a control stick. I didn't do that because I didn't have that many control sticks, and I was like, these are super important and useful. I don't want to use a whole lot of them for this place. But you could literally easily choose the dungeon if you wanted to, or you could go through and play it how you intended. Nintendo gave you that option. And, there was more story there as well. You could run around and do things at your own pace if you wanted to in Tears of the Kingdom, but there was literally a story. Like, all the dungeons played a part in the main story, and if you would, go to Lookout Landing after you complete an area and be like, hey, where do you want me to go next? They would tell you where you could go next, and you kind of got this feeling of story progression doing it that way. Which, if you want to see, I have a video where I go more into depth of how Tears of the Kingdom has a linear plot, if you know what you're looking for. And I'll put a link in the description that you can click on, or I have a card floating around here that you can click on. So, I understand. People are concerned that Echoes of Wisdom may not be the experience that they're looking for. But I think we need to be honest with ourselves of why we play these Zelda games. We're not playing them for the gameplay. The gameplay is not what we're there for. Is it nice whenever it has really good gameplay? Yes. But we're there for the stories, guys. That is the whole reason why we love the Zelda games, is the story of good conquering evil, of, a little nobody stepping up to the plate and helping save the world whenever the world needs to be saved. Breath of the Wild, there was very little story. Again, it was only mostly at the beginning when you were on the Great Plateau, and then you got the big reveal of, the old guy was, the final king of Hyrule. Spoilers if you haven't played it. But let's be honest, there's been a few spoilers in this video already. And then, at the end, and if you got the memories, the story was a little bit more involved at the end. And whenever Nintendo, were like, okay, a lot of people didn't like that, they went through and they made a story. The dungeons returned to their themes, and those themes played into the story. The Fire Temple, the Goron Lost City, that's where the sage for the Gorons lived. He lived in that city. He probably worked in that city too. And, it wasn't until something probably tragic happened with him, with the whole Ganon thing, that, the Gorons decided, okay, maybe we don't need to live underground where all of this weird gloom, darkness stuff is. Maybe we need to go up to the surface and get away from this crazy stuff. And the first temple, the Stormwind Arc, was amazing. It was a part of the Rito history of whenever they were working with the Zonai. When the Zonai first arrived, it was a gift for them to help them, probably have an easier time getting back and forth between, the Zonai civilization and the Rito civilization. And so there was more stories to be had in the Tears of the Kingdom game than what was found in Breath of the Wild, and that is what people loved. So honestly, I feel if Echoes of Wisdom just has a really good story and the dungeons are themed and they play into the stories like the Zora Ancient Waterworks or the, the Thunder Temple, totally 100% seems like an ancient, this is where the Gerudo went to bury and honor their deceased ancestors. Like, if they continue to do stuff like that in Echoes of the Wisdom, it's going to be a good game. And people aren't going to be worried about, oh, this isn't classic Zelda, so I don't want to play it. Like, no, the story will be there. So long as the story is there, people are going to love it. And it's going to be great. Everyone's going to love it. And I'm super happy and excited for this game, and I want to see what the story is like. I want to know if Tri is an inhabitant of the Steel World, if she's something like one of Zelda's ancestors that has come back to help her. Like, there's so many different questions and things like that that I want to know about Echoes of Wisdom, which is why I'm so excited for this game, and I want to play it, because I want to know. And yeah, if you guys are, still not sure if you're going to want to play it, I plan on streaming the game. You can either subscribe to my page, or you can, just kind of keep an eye out for my stuff. And when the game comes out, I'm planning on playing it and going through the story with you guys. So if you want to see if, it does actually have story and it looks like it's going to be, the things of Zelda that we love before you pick it up, please come watch. I will find the answers to, does this have the story that people need and people love about Zelda? And yeah, I hope you all enjoy. I'll talk to you later. Have a great day. Be safe.